Good afternoon, Sir J.B. Avelino, and good afternoon to everyone. We, the Group 3, will report and discuss the topic all about commercial site development, the town planning process, and the environmental site analysis. So again, I will introduce to you the reporter for the commercial site development. The reporter is yours truly, Dave Ruvel Vivillesa. Sundan naman doon ni John Steven Fuscablo for the town planning process. Alisa Joy de Villa and Maria Melasol Megano will report the environmental site analysis. So this afternoon, I will report and discuss to all of you the topic focuses on commercial site development. Next slide. What is commercial site development? Commercial site development is a term that is used to define the development of office, commercial, mixed use for multifamily, and non-single family residential developments. The project in commercial site development have to be reviewed to comply the applicable codes. Approval for all application is made by the Director of the Community Development. So sa word nga commercial, which means generally relates to anything business or commerce, commercial activities is selling goods or service products. And also kung ang tawag naman natin ang commercial building, definition is which at least 50% of each floor space is used for commercial activities such as retail, providing service and service, food service, and many more. Kung hambal natin ang commercial site development, sa ang general layout and configuration of a site, dira makita ang footprint, street layout, and parking, landscaping and lighting site, cross-section drawings, and building elevation. Next slide. So, ang sunod natin i-discuss is ang design guidelines. Each commercial development project will have its own set of requirements. This outline is intended as an overview of the subject that the architect, engineer, and the owner should consider when planning a small to medium commercial development. Ang design guidelines are set of recommendation on how to apply design principle to provide positive user experience. Dira ma-fall into several groups including ang style, layout, user interface UI components, text, accessibility, and design patterns. Next slide. So, ano naman kung tawgon kung ang local planning regulation? So, as with all new project, the designer should research the laws, codes, and ordinances that govern development in the jurisdiction. These include municipal, township, county, state, and federal regulation as they pertain to land building development. Local planning regulation naman is a guideline document sets out regulatory development, controls properties in the area to which it applies. As the main author of the project, the architect must know the rules and regulation that is implemented in that area. Dapat tanan nga policies imo gid nya i-research para sa imo nga project sa dira nga lugar. Next slide. So, ano naman ang ginatawag na zoning? Zoning confirms that the zoning classification of the property permits the intended use. For example, to build a warehouse, the tract of land would have to be zoned for industrial use. The zoning classification also determines what level of development is allowed on a particular tract of land. So, zoning classifies privately owned urban land or areas into different zone. Pwede siya maging industrial, commercial, residential, or agricultural. So each zone has limits on its density ratio of the building structure related to plot surface. Pwede man siya sa size of properties, types of building allowed, and the location. Next slide. Building codes. The architect should find out what relevant codes or laws requires in regard to life safety, welfare, and accessibility. This requirement should provide minimum criteria by which to measure the design and the construction of a project. The intended use, the type of construction will dictate allowable heights and areas. Codes vary around the country, so architect must consult the local government for all applicable codes and laws and local amendments. Pertinent laws include the BOCA, UBC, SBCC, NFPA, ASHRAE, ANSE, and the ADA Universal Accessibility Law. So, makita nyo dyan sa presentation, may picture dira. Dira nyo makita kung sino dapat ang kadtuan kag ang may authority, jurisdiction for some codes. So, ang may authority for health department is the state of county city. The fire codes, ang city fire marshal. Ang county codes, ang county building office. State codes, Department of Planning, State Fire Marshal, State Building Inspector. The city building codes is for city planning, city building inspector. Ang federal laws, codes, and standard is the federal agencies, and the zoning laws is the state, county, city. So, next slide. Environmental analysis. Environmental issues such as wetlands preservation, potential groundwater contamination, and preservation of native flora and fauna should be considered. Local groups can provide information regarding local environmental issues. So sa environmental analysis, ang architect gathers information about the project site and surrounding to use in design as well as schematic design, design development, and the construction document. Next slide. Geotechnical analysis. A geotechnical engineer should be retained at the inception of the project to provide a thorough subsurface investigation of the property. The key information provided by such a survey includes the following. Number 1, soil quality or types. Soil are described ranging from their composition to drainage. So, sa presentation, makita nyo ang different types of soil nga makita perme sa site. Next is number 2, bearing capacity. A variety of field and or laboratory testing considered in conjunction with anticipated structural dead loads goes into analyzing how a planned building will react to a soil condition on a site. Settlement is one issue to consider here. So, bearing capacity, ama na ang condition of soil if kung butangan na siya sang loads sa ibabaw. Muna siya ginatawag nga ginaobra pag lab sang soil. Next is number 3, foundation recommendation. The geotechnical engineer used analytical data about the soil quality, type, and the bearing capacity of the soil to make recommendation regarding the most efficient and cost-effective foundation system. Ang engineer ay ang ga-analyze ang data or lab result sa kung ano nga type kag quality sang dutang ara sa imong site. Kag dira makita kung ano ang mas effective nga foundation sa imong site. Next slide. Next naman is ang lot coverage. Zoning laws regulate the amount of physical construction that can occur in given piece of land. Physical construction covers building and paves, impervious surface, sidewalk or blacktop. Another measure affecting the allowable building footprint is building setback, the distance that must exist between a structure and the property line. Building setbacks are typically described in terms of front, rear, and side yards. Right of way, the property easement. Local municipal ordinance describe required setbacks, which vary based on location and intended use. Tawag ng lot coverage portion of that area expressed is a percentage or occupied by all buildings or structure. Next slide. Next naman is the property survey. Property survey verify the property boundaries, street lines, contours, pertinent landmarks, right-of-way, and easement, construction restriction of a piece of a property. So, ang mas may expert kara mag-land survey or property survey is the land surveyor. Land surveyor is an expert in defining property line. Next slide. Drainage easement. When properties share a common storm water basin, local authorities can hold easement to allow for storm water drainage across multiple properties. Drainage easements are not required when individual property owners are responsible for stormwater management. So, ang drainage easement, the municipality needs to ensure that drainage easements are in place so that city worker can access private property in order to maintain and repair drainage areas. Kung ang drainage naton wala ga-work properly, it will cause or at risk on flooding and other problems. Next slide. Maximum building height. The maximum building height on a particular site is usually defined in terms of both stories and feet above the finished grade. These criteria are set by local ordinance and building codes. Ang maximum height, it's depend in the local ordinance ag sa building code kung gaano kataas dapat ang imo nga ginaobra nga commercial building. Next slide. Parking requirements. Parking requirements typically are a function of intended use and building size on space per 20 square meter or square of its building area. In suburban office park planning, this is commonly the governing factor when maximizing buildable area on a small constricted site. As you can see in the presentation, the picture, dira nyo makita ang sign with international access symbol designating space for accessible parking. Diyan man makita ang sign access symbol and text that reads one accessible. And access aisle shared by two parking space. The standard parking space 96 inches minimum width. And van parking space 132 inch minimum width. Next slide. Okay, maano naman ta dire sa utilities. Utilities, the architect must determine which utilities are required, which are available, how site access will be designed, and where the utility lines will enter the building. Utilities include water, sewer, gas, electric, and telephone. As you can see sa gilid sa aton niya presentation, may arada ang internet and cable, water and sewer, electricity, trash collection and natural gas, and also the security or alarm system. Next slide. So the next slide is ang building entrance. Public exposure, topography, orientation, and parking should be considered in designing and siting the main entrance. To maximize a building presence on the site and help orient user, the main entrance should be obviously and easily visible. Site topography and the intended use of the building will determine orientation of the entrance, with consideration of sun and angle of sun and views. The main entrance should be readily recognizable from the main parking area. So the entry should be designed so that the visitor or resident can readily find or easily find their way to and around the building. So next slide. Traffic survey. A typical traffic survey analyzes traffic patterns, density generator, and peak periods. This information is used to determine the guidelines procedure required to provide safe and effective flows of vehicular and pedestrian traffic. Local governing agency determine the scope and extent of the survey required. To capture data that accurately reflect the real world situation in the area. So, ang data or traffic survey is counting the numbers of vehicle using a road and ang mandamo pang types of traffic survey. Next slide. So next is ang service access. Architect must consider vehicular service access to both site and the building. Site design and building orientation must allow for maneuverability of service, delivery, and sanitary vehicles. All the commercial site development must have the service access or road para makalibot ang mga vehicle nga gusto magsulod kag mag-exit sa site or in the commercial building. So in the last slide or my report, the last picture dira nyo makita ang tanan niya ara sa atong gidiscuss or atong gindiscuss kag ang dapat ara sa aton niya commercial site development or sa plano. That's all to my report. So the next reporter will be John Steven Foscablo, the town planning process.
The town planning process. So the introduction is the site planning for development projects should be a sequential process that begins with information gathering and ends with detailed design drawings. The process involves 3 stages: the analysis, design, and implementation. So the chart next to this slide indicates a planning process. However, this can vary to accommodate the specifics of a particular project. Physical site characteristics, urban or suburban location, and the community criteria modify the process. The site planning process includes both architect and landscape architect, and in some cases, biologists, civil engineers, and others, and other professions. So, an integrated approach to site development and architecture helps a quality environment. The text on this page is presented as a checklist for structuring a project. So we have here the town planning process. Client input, first of all, research and analysis. Down there is the literature review, community involvement, regional, state, and federal planning, local planning information, site analysis. Next is the design process, which is the client input, and the program development, alternative preliminary plan development. Next is the public view, and Next is our implementation. Down there is the final design plans and building permits, evaluation. So let's tackle about these things. First of all, very important in town planning. So the client contact and input. So the first step is contact between the client and the site planner. The client may have some development objectives based on the final capabilities and market feasibility. It is important for the site planner to obtain all client data relative to the planning site. So guys, client contact and input is very important because diri start tanan nga planning for the for town planning. Diri start tanan ang vision nga ginatawag. So by contacting the client, may ara nga relationship nga ginabuild kag understanding sa aton nga gusto nga design sa aton nga town. Muna siya. So next here is the literature review. So site planning covers a variety of situations from rural and suburban to high intensity urban. There is substantial literature on planning sites and designing neighborhoods of all densities. Recent publication demonstrates a return to the basic town planning principles that have produced orderly community design throughout history. So, guys, when we design a town, so we need to have a historical background of this town or the history background of the community for us to have knowledge about the principles or the design we want to design for the client. Okay, so we have here the principles of town planning. I included. So first is the zoning, which mentioned earlier of Dave. The town should be divided into suitable zones such as commercial zone, industrial zone, residential zone, and etc. So next here is the green belt. Green belt is non-development zone on periphery of the town. It prevents the haphazard sprawl of the town, restricting its size. So the sprawl here, the urban sprawl, also called a sprawl or suburban sprawl, the rapid expansion of the geographic extent of cities and towns, often characterized by low-density residential housings, single-use zoning, and increased reliance on the private automotive for transportation. So, the green belt is the like our trees here in our community. So it is very important in principles of town planning and designing towns. So next is the housing. Housing must be well researched and constructed to meet the needs of the local community. So this is very important to have house planning to our community. So when a land use plan is made, zones for independent housing, mid-rise buildings, high-rise buildings are allocated. So this is very important also to mabala naton nga kundi naton sila ibutang ang aton mga housing. So next is the public buildings. The public buildings should be well grouped, okay, so and distribute throughout the town. When assigning space for public buildings, factors such as parking facilities and road widths must be considered. So ara sa aton mga building code, ang nakabutang ang mga dimensions for our parking facilities, ang aton road widths and etc. Kag dapat naton i-consider ini in designing our town. Okay. So next is the recreation centers. recreation centers have to be given importance while designing a town. They are necessary for the recreational activities of the general public. So, this is very important also in designing a town. Dapat mayara kita sing mga recreational centers like park, like ano pa da nga nga pwede naton nga mabutang recreation centers. So next is the road system. So the efficient of the any town is measured by the layout of its roads. A nicely designed road system puts a great impression in the minds of people, especially the town visitors to the town. So ang road system guys ang dapat naton nga tagaan man sing importansya kay because nga makita diri ang paano nangin well designed ang aton nga town because of the road nga do kumbaga mangin flexible ini bala para sa hindi lang sa naga-start diri sa town kundi sa iban mga visitors nga nagakadto sa town. Okay. Next is the transport facilities. Efficient in transport facilities includes both public and private networks. Public transport networks includes access to buses, trains, trams, and trolley buses. Efficiency in using the public transport will determine the success of that town in terms of designing. So this is the principles of town planning, guys. Okay, next here is the community involvement. So early in the planning process, contact community groups with an interest in proposed project. So we can contact any groups that can do have interest in proposed project of our client. So such efforts yield useful information for the community design and particularly important when a proposed project is adjacent to existing development. Compatibility issues are typically resolved with community participation. Okay, so well understood man ang sentence. So one method of involving the community is the charrette. So what is charrette? A charrette is an intensive multidisciplinary workshop. So isa ini siya ka workshop, charrette. So with the aim of developing a design or a vision or a project or planning activity. So charrettes are often conduct to design such things as parks and buildings or plan communities or transport system. So involving the community, mayara kita nga charrette. So amo ni siya ang charrette, meaning ang charrette nga mayara kita nga mga interested groups, community sa aton nga community nga gusto nga magpakita sang ilang nga mga visions para sa ka town nga proposed nga town nga pag develop. So a participatory planning process with a limited time frame, usually 1 day to a week, in which residents, municipal staff, amo ni siya ang community nga participate, elected leaders and other participate in the physical design of a project. So muna siya. The planner receives local information useful for the design, and individuals and groups bring their interest to bear of the beginning of the design process, thereby expediting final approval. So, kumbaga nag-gather kita sa mga informations and nag-gather kita sa mga suggestions. Do amo ni siya ang community involvement. Okay? Next here is the regional, state, and federal planning. So some areas of the country have established regional agencies for inter-community issues such as water management, transportation, population studies, and pollution control. Some communities have adopted regional planning guidelines. So the state and or federal criteria can also affect progress. States plans may address a broad issues applicable to large cities or impose constraints on site develop, involving issues of statewide concern. Also, some states required environmental impact statements for large-scale projects. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for environmental review of proposed dredge and field operation and navigable waters and wetlands. The Federal Flood Insurance Program established minimum elevations for potential flood areas. Other site region and local authorities also may oversee the protection of air and water quality and other environmental issues. So here in the Philippines is the republic with a presidential form of government wherein the power is equally divided among its three branches, which is the executive, legislative, and judicial. So the government seeks to act in the best interest of its citizens through this system of check balance. So we have here the administrative regions are groupings of geographically adjacent LGUs. So among mga LGUs diri sa aton sa Philippines, may we contact them for the updates of our para hindi bala para makuan bala ang mga issues sa aton nga pag-obrahon nga project. Pwede naton sila ma-contact para mapakita naton ang kumbaga ang unity sa aton nga community. So para establish bala ang regional agencies for intercommunity issues such as water management, transportation, population studies, and pollution control. Kag based diri is LGUs which are established, established and modified by the President of the Philippines based on the need to more coherently make economic development policies and coordinate the provision of national government services. So ang LGUs may provide protection or oversee the protection of the air, water quality, and other environmental issues. So they can help us in planning a town. Next here is the local planning information. The planner must collect local planning information. Personal contact with planning and zoning agencies is important in order to comprehend local criteria. Following is a list of information to review. First on our list is the planning documents. Many communities have adopted comprehensive plans that indicate the particular land use and intensity of the site. In addition, information on the availability and or phasing of public services and utilities, environmental criteria, traffic planning, and population trends can be found in most comprehensive plans. Some communities requires that rezoning meet the criteria provided in their comprehensive plans. In addition to the comprehensive plan, communities may also adopt neighborhood or area plans that refine the comprehensive plans as it is planned as it relates to a particular local. Many of these studies stipulate specific zoning categories for individual parcels of the land. So we need the planning documents. So kinahanglan tagad nga recognize or mag-research gid sa aton nga site for some nga may ara gid kita nga manami nga pag-design sa isa ka area. So manami ang aton nga design kundi nga mangin manami ini sa public services sa aton nga community kag sa aton nga environment. Okay. Urban design plans. Some communities have adopted urban design plans for creating a harmonious physical environment. These documents may range from conceptual to those that incorporate specific requirements. Some provide bonuses in land use intensities or incorporating urban amenities such as plazas and squares. There may be also be criteria for retrofitting existing areas, a critical need in American cities where a substantial amount of urban area is deteriorated or developed incoherently. So we need this urban design plans nga para mangin harmonious ang aton nga physical environment. Like these pictures, we have here like a very harmonious gid kag organized, well organized ang aton nga pagplano if we adopt this urban design planning. Kag ang aton nga mga plazas, aton nga mga squares, aton nga mga parks well designed gid siya kag ang spacing is ara gid sa iyang exact location. Okay. So we have here zoning. So land zoning prescribes the intensity and the type of land use allowed. A zoning change is required if the planning projects differs. Regulations often need to be modified to allow good community design. Common examples of regulations discouraging good urban form, including excessive setbacks and restricted mixed-use development. So, importante gid ang zoning, like para sa halin kagi sa report ni Dave sa subong, very important ang zoning para ma-locate naton kag mabutang naton sa exact places ang aton nga mga needs in designing our town. So we have here the picture. We have here the commercial hotel. So well organized. We have here the office, the main road, the retail stores. So the renovation centers. Okay, so we have good and manami nga design if we practice zoning. So in our planning. In line with this is the public works standards. Local public works criteria significantly affects the design of large sites, roadway layout, cross sections, and the drainage are typical requirements. Excessive roadway standards designed for automobile convenience with little regard for the pedestrian are typical of today's public works regulations. Such standards should be modified to allow coherent neighbor design. In designing a town, we need to suit it or ma-base kita sa national building codes. Kag mabalaan naton ang mga standard measurements ng mga bike lanes, sang pedestrian, kundi naton nga pwede i-locate, aton nga highways. So the drainage typical requirements, so the roadway layout naton, so dapat suit gid siya sa aton nga national building code. So this is very important nga makita sa isa ka design ang gasunod kita sa aton nga building code. Next here is the public services and utilities. Other information that may require additional research includes: first is the availability of potable water, including local and state regulations on wells. Second is availability of public sewer service, access to trunk lines, and available increase in flow. If the sewage lines are not immediately available, determine project phasing of these services as well as alternatives to sewage collection and treatment, including septic tanks. So this is very important. Third is the access to public roads existing in project carrying capacities and levels of services of the roads. So state and local road departments can provide this information. Lastly is the availability in capacities of schools and other public facilities such as parks and libraries. So, amo na siya ang public service and utilities. So we have here is site analysis. Site analysis is the one of the planner's major responsibilities. Okay, this is very important, guys, in planning, especially sa town. So, site analysis dapat balaan naton kung anong ara sa site, kung ano ang iyang sun path, ang wind flow, or other things nga dapat naton nga balaan. So all the on and off-site design determinants must be evaluated before designing begins. Okay, we should evaluate our site before we begin designing. For details and see the following pages on environmental site analysis. So, dire na kita sa design process. So, program development. At the program development stage, background research, citizen input, and site analysis are combined with the client input and synthesized into a set of a program strategies. Basic elements for program development include market and financial criteria, federal, state, regional, and local planning information, local political climate development cost, the client's objectives, and the site opportunities and constraints as developed in the synthesis of environmental site determinants. Balancing the various determinants will lead to an appropriate approach to site development, considering dwelling unit type, density, marketing, time phasing, and similar criteria, as well as graphic studies of the site to finalize the program. Develop clear graphic representations of design concepts to present to the client and other who may have input to the process. If the project cannot be accomplished under the existing zoning or public works requirements, requesting a regulatory change becomes a part of a program. So, nagather na natin ang background research, citizen input, and site analysis. So, may ara dito nga mga gin-suggest ang mga community kag aton nga client. So, we can continue in developing the program development. So, sa mga basic, pwede natin ma-preset ang basic elements ng program development. So may ara na kita nga, ma-foresee na nato na ang design nga i-develop kag mapakita naton ang clear graphic representation sang design concepts nga gin-gather naton para sa aton client. Here it comes, the alternative plan preparation. Okay, so once the program has been accepted by the client, develop several design solutions to meet the program objectives. When an alternative has been accepted, develop it into the preliminary plan. Okay, so this plan should be relatively detailed, showing all spatial relationships, infrastructure, landscaping, and other relevant information. So, diri detailed na diri ang aton ipakita sa aton nga client because nga nakagather na kita sang information, sang history sa background of our design or the town. Kag nagagather kita sa mga suggestions from the community and also the client. So, ma-foresee na naton ang needs kag detailed nga mga special requirements sang aton nga gina-designan. Okay. So next here is the public review. So a zoning change requires a public review. Okay, so gusto gid sang mga isang community nga makita man kung ano ang ma-foresee nila bala, makita nila ang future plans for the town, okay, itself. Some communities require substantial data such as impact statements and other narrative graphic exhibits, okay, like this picture. Nga ginpakita diri ang development sang isa ka town in graphic exhibits. Okay. With other may require only on application for the zoning change. Local requirements for changes can be complex, and it is imperative that the planner and client's attorney are familiar with the local criteria. Final design plans. So this is very important, and the last thing. At this stage, the preliminary plans are refined into final site development plans that include fully dimensioned drawings, printed drawings, landscapes plans, and site details. This is very important. But in this state, amo na siya ang pinaka-final gid nga outcome sang aton nga design. Final development plans also includes drawings prepared by the engineer or surveyor, ang aton mga allied professions such as legal plots and utilities, streets, and drainage plan. Mga engineer ina siya kag surveyor ang nagaobra. Upon approval, final design plans are recorded in the public records in the form of plots. Homeowner associate agreements, deeds, restrictions, and similar legal documents must also be recorded, and they become binding on all owners and successive owners unless changed legally. Bonding may be required for the infrastructure and other public facilities. In some instances, the planner may develop specific design standards for the total build-out of the project. So, thank you guys.
Good day, everyone. So I'm Maria Mirasol Jane Bimigano, and my report is all about environmental site analysis. Topographical survey. So you can see the whole site and the areas. So we have survey data. So the first step in any site analysis is gathering of physical site data. An aerial photograph and an accurate survey showing the following information are basic to any site analysis process. So first, we have scale, north arrow, benchmark, and date of survey. Second, we have track boundary, lines. Third, easements, where you can find the location, width, and purpose. Fourth, names and locations of existing road right-of-way or adjacent to the track, including bridges, curbs, gutters, and culverts. So, fifth, the position of buildings and other structures, such as foundations, walls, fence, steps, and paved areas. Sixth, utilities on or adjacent to the track location of gas lines, fire hydrants, electric and telephone poles, street lights, direction, distance to, and size of nearest water mains and sewers, and invert elevation of sewers. 7. Location of swamps, springs, streams, bodies of water, drainage ditches, watershed areas, floodplains, and other physical features. 8. We have outline of wooded areas with names and condition of plant material. Number 9. Contour intervals of 2 to 5 feet depending on slope, gradients, and spot elevations at breaks in grade, along drainage channels or swales, and at selected point as needed. So, considerable additional information may be needed depending on design considerations and site complexities such as soil information and studies of the geological structure of the site. So federal regulations for wetland mapping and conservation may also be relevant. Suburban site analysis. The site analysis is a major responsibility of the site planner. So the physical analysis of the site is developed primarily from field inspections. So using the survey, the area photographed where warranted, infrared aerial photographs, the site designer working in the field and the office verifies the survey and notes site design determinants. This should include, but not be limited to, into the following. So first, we have areas of steep and moderate slopes. Second, the macro and microclimatic conditions, including sun angles during different seasons, prevailing breezes, wind shadows, frost packets, and sectors where high or low points give protection from sun and wind. Number 3, solar energy considerations. If solar energy appears feasible, a detailed climate analysis must be undertaken considering factors such as detailed sun charts, daily averages of sunlight and cloud cover, daily rain averages, areas exposed to the sun at different seasons, the solar radiation patterns, and the temperature patterns. So number 4, potential flood zones and routes of surface water runoff. 5, possible road access to the site, including potential conflicts with existing road systems and carrying capabilities of adjacent roadways, usually available from local or state road departments. So 6, the natural areas that from an ecological and aesthetic standpoint should be saved. So we have that's all trees masses with name and condition of 3 species and understory planting. 7, significant wildlife habitats that should be affected by site modification. 8, the significant the soil conditions relative to supporting plant material, areas suitable for construction, erosion potential, and septic tanks if relevant. Number 9, geological considerations relative to supporting structures. 10, exceptional views. So there are objectionable views used on site photographs. Adjacent, existing, and proposed land uses with notations on compatibility and incompatibility. 12, potential noise sources, particularly noise generated from traffic that can be mitigated by using plants, herming, and walls by extending the distance between the source and the receiver. Now, urban site analysis. Although much of the information presented for suburban sites may apply equally to urban sites, so additional site design criteria may be necessary. So the urban environment has numerous design determinants in the form of existing structures, city patterns, and microclimatic conditions. Next is environmental considerations. As you can see the pictures, there is air movement, the sun and shadow patterns, and also the reflections. So the air movement, kita nyo na ang arrow nga blue. So muna siyang air movement. So prevailing breezes, characteristic of a region, may be greatly modified by urban high-rise structures. Predominant air movement patterns in a city may be along roadways and between buildings. So the placement, shape, and height of existing buildings can create air turbulence caused by micro air movement patterns. These patterns may influence the location of building elements such as outdoor areas and balconies. Also, a building's design and placement can mitigate or increase local wind turbulence. Second, we have the sun and shadow patterns. So, makita mo na ang yellow nga pattern. That is sun and shadow patterns. So, the sun and shadow patterns of existing structures should be studied to determine how they would affect the proposed building. This is particularly important for outdoor terraces and balconies where sunlight may be desirable. Sun and shadow patterns also should be considered as sources of internal heat gain or loss. Building orientation, window sizes, and shading devices can modify internal heat gain or loss. Studies should include daily and seasonal patterns and the shadows the proposed building would cast on existing buildings in the open spaces. So we have reflections. Reflections from adjacent structures, such as glass-clad buildings, may be a problem. So the new building should be designed to compensate for such glare or, if possible, oriented away from it.
So good afternoon everyone. I'm going to continue our report. So in urban contextual analysis, first is the building typology and hierarchy. An analysis of the particular building type, residential, commercial, and public, relative to the hierarchy of the various building types in the city is useful in deciding the general design approach of a new building. For example, public buildings may be dominant in placement of design, while residential buildings are subdominant. It is important to maintain any existing hierarchy that reinforces visual order in the city. Any predominant architectural solutions and detailed characteristic of the building type incorporated in the new building's design can help maintain a recognizable building type. So usually sa isa ka city or town, may mga historical buildings or houses just like sa Vigan where they preserve the Spanish colonial architecture which makes their city recognizable. And kung mag-design sang building or residences, dapat wala man nagalayo sa hierarchy sang isa ka city. Second is the regional character. An analysis of the city's regional architectural characteristics is appropriate in developing a design solution that responds to unique regional characteristics. Regional characteristics may be revealed through unique architectural types, through vernacular buildings resulting from local climatic and cultural characteristics, and from historical significant architecture. Historic structures should be saved by modifying them from the proposed new use or by incorporating parts of the existing structures into the proposed design. So just like sa Batanes, they use stones and bricks to build their houses since most of the time prone gid sila sa typhoons. That's why ga-affect man ang pag-design sa structures sa climate kag hindi man pwede nga patindugan dito sa mga light material such as sa bahay kubo. Third is the city form. The delineation of city form created by road layout, location of major open spaces, and architecture created form should be analyzed. Elements that delineate city form should be reinforced by architectural development solutions for a particular place within the city. For example, a building proposed for a corner site should be designed to reinforce the corner through building form, entrance, and design details. A building proposed for mid-block may be a visually unifying element providing connection and continuity with adjacent buildings. Sites at the ends of the important vistas and adjacent to the major city squares probably should be reserved for important public buildings. So, it is important gid to plan properly ang layout sang road as well as man sang functionality sang isa ka building kung adjacent gid man sa and in relation to the society. For example, ang mga hospitals, ang ila roadway should not be in sama traffic kay in case of Immortal and St. Anthony, gamay lang gid ang alagyan for vehicles. Fourth is the building scale and fenestration. It is important to analyze building scale and fenestration of nearby structures reflecting, although not necessarily reproducing, such detailing in the proposed building can provide visual unity and continuity in the architectural character of the city. One example is the use of placement of cornice lines to define the building's lower floors in relation to the adjacent buildings. Cornice lines also can define the building's relationship to the pedestrians in terms of scale and use. So, fenestration is the arrangement of windows, doors, and openings in the building. Kag fenestration is necessary man sa pagplano kag pagdesign sang isa ka structure. Kay the more nga solid ang structure, the more it will become stable. Kag once you start adding holes, galain na ang availability to carry loads. Kag kung manotice ninyo nga ang ancient temples, nga gagmay lang gid ang buo sa mga bintana nila. Kay that time, ga-struggle pa sila kung paano ma-maintain ang strength sang structure. Fifth is the building transition. Sometimes it may be appropriate to use arcades and porches to provide transition between the building's private interior and the public sidewalk. Including them may be especially worthy if adjacent buildings have these elements. And also, building transitions bridges traditional and modern architecture. And also example man is sa isa ka balay where nagbutang sa courtyard in addition sa open space to separate the porch as well as man sa foyer to integrate into more than just one area. And lastly is the views. Important city views of plazas, squares, monuments, and natural features such as waterfronts and parks should be considered. It is important to design the proposed structure to enhance and preserve such views for the public and for inhabitants of the nearby buildings, as well as incorporating them as views from the proposed building. Let's move to environmental site analysis. If site has numerous environmental design determinants, the site planner may analyze each environmental system individually in order to comprehend the environmental character of the site more clearly. This can be a complex process, and a site planner or landscape architect with expertise in environmental analysis should be retained to coordinate such an effort. So, following is a list of environmental design determinants that, depending on the particular site, may be considered and included in an overlay format. So, first is the slope. The slope analysis is developed on the contour map. Consideration should include the percentage of slope and orientation of slope relative to the infrastructures and land uses. So this type of analysis process is commonly used on mountainsides, excavations, and etc., where ginatest nila ang stability of man-made and natural slopes as well its condition kung vulnerable sa failures or mag-collapse. Second is the soil patterns. Consideration may include the analysis of soils by erosion potential, compressibility and plasticity, capability of support plant growth, drainage capabilities, possible sources of pollution or toxic waste, septic tank location if relevant, and the proposed land uses and their infrastructures. So, any soil ga-affect man sa human activities, not only in agriculture. It is important man to determine the soil type or ground condition para mabalan ang stability sa site kag kung suitable for constructing a building. And mostly, ang mga urban planners gagamit sang soil map para ma-identify ang mga areas if suitable siya bala for agriculture, industry, and for residential. Third is the vegetation. Consideration of indigenous species, values of each in terms of the environmental system include size and condition, the succession of growth toward climax conditions, uniqueness, the ability of the certain species to tolerate construction activities, aesthetic values, and density of undergrowth. So, ang vegetation improves the quality of building, especially sa energy efficiency, and also sa visual quality man sang building. And hindi lang provide sang benefits sa environment, also sa society man kag sa economy, kay makabulig sa pag-reduce sa air and noise pollution. Fourth is the wildlife. Consideration of indigenous species includes their movement patterns, the degree of change each species can tolerate, and feeding and breeding areas. So, hindi lang man kita nga mga tao ang gaistar, kundi may mga sapat man. May ara man nga animal-friendly architecture, may ara man nga hindi sila favor. For instance, birds might seen as desirable creatures kung makita ta sa palibot, but once they start to do unwanted ways, such as depositing their waste sa mga bintana, kag outer walls, kag ang mga pugad nila nagiging nuisance na sila dason. And another pagid sa mga building nga hindi ma-maintenance or abandoned buildings, ginaistaran sa mga unwanted inhabitants like bath. Fifth is geology. Consideration of underlying rock masses studies the depth of different rock layers and suitability of different geological formations in terms of potential infrastructures and building. So, it is important to examine the site first, like kung ano ang background history sa site, when excavating, stability sa slope, bearing capacity, kag kung ano ang klase nga foundation ang i-consider. 6 is the surface and subsurface water. Consideration of natural drainage patterns covers aquifer charge areas, erosion's potential, and floodplains. So, ang subsurface drainage is a process of removal of water which has infiltrated into the soil. So, ang goals ng construction of subsurface drainage systems is kwaon ang mga wala nagahold sa tubig halin sa babaw nga layers ng soil para ma-ensure nga enough gid ang pag-supply sa root zone as well as when gina-construct ang building nga wala ga-damage ang soil. And last is the climate. Consideration of microclimatic conditions include prevailing breezes at different times of the year, wind shadows, frost pockets, and air drainage patterns. So, since energy nag-contribute man sa global warming, it is important to design some building nga makalesen sa energy use. In this analysis, gina-consider ang seasonality, directions ng sun, natural shade, kag ang weather pattern in designing a building. Computer application. The above process is labor-intensive when developed by hand on individual sheets of mylar. So mylar is a form of polystyrene used to make heat-resistant plastic films and sheets. However, this particular method of environmental analysis is easily adaptable to the CAD or computer-aided drafting system. Commercial drafting programs suitable for overlay approach are readily available. Simplified, the method is as follows. First is a map, such as soil map, is positioned on a digitizer and the information is transferred to the processor through the use of the stylus. So stylus is a pointing device. One major advantage of the use of computer is that the scale of the map being recorded will be transferred to the selected scale by the processor. Second, the same process is repeated for the development of the next overlay. For example, vegetation. Once again, any scale map may be used. This process is repeated until all overlays have been stored. At any time, one or all overlays can be produced on the screen. Third, the individual overlays or any combination of overlays can be drawn on mylar with a platter. If appropriate for the particular analysis, the platter will draw in color. The resulting overlay sheets take considerably less time than by hand and may be more accurate. Fourth is the overlay process can be recorded by videotape or by slides from the screen for the use in presentations. So that's all from my report. Thank you for listening.